In the sprawling, sterile lobby of St. Jude's Medical Center, where the air hummed with the quiet anxieties of life and death, there was one constant source of warmth: the gentle, unwavering music of Eleanor Vance. 40 years every Tuesday and Thursday morning, 82-year-old Eleanor sat at the same worn piano, her fingers, though gnarled with age, dancing across the ivory keys. She wasn't an employee, she was a volunteer, a fixture, the quiet beating heart of a place that often felt heartless. Her music was a language everyone understood. It was a lullaby for a worried mother waiting for news, a moment of peace for a doctor between surgeries, a gentle distraction for a child with a broken arm. She asked for nothing, expected nothing. The small, tarnished plaque on the piano simply read, "Music is the medicine of the soul." Eleanor lived by those words. She lived alone in a small apartment 4 blocks away, surrounded by photographs of a life well lived but now quiet. The piano at St. Jude's was her family, her purpose. It was where she spoke to the world without ever saying a word. And looks like her process is once the perfect... Before we continue Eleanor's story, if you believe that the most valuable contributions in life often go unnoticed and unrewarded, then please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Together we can share these beautiful stories of quiet dedication with the world. And now, let's return to St. Jude's, where a storm was brewing that Eleanor never saw coming. The change began with the arrival of Mr. Robert Harrison. He was young, ambitious, with an MBA and a sharp suit that seemed out of place among the scrubs and lab coats. As the new director of hospital operations, Harrison saw St. Jude's not as a place of healing, but as a business to be optimized. He walked the halls with a tablet in hand, his eyes scanning for inefficiencies, for wasted space, for anything that didn't generate revenue. And his eyes landed on Eleanor and her piano. On a Tuesday morning, as Eleanor was playing a soft rendition of Clair de Lune, Harrison approached. He waited for her to finish the piece, but his posture was impatient, his arms crossed. The handful of patients and family members who had been listening felt the shift in atmosphere. "Ma'am," Harrison began, his voice polite but cold, devoid of any warmth. "I'm Robert Harrison, the new director here. I've been reviewing the floor plan for our lobby modernization project." Eleanor smiled, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners.
"It's lovely to meet you, dear. I'm Eleanor Vance. I've been playing here for a very long time."
"So I've been told," Harrison said, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And while your hobby is charming, we're moving in a new direction. This space," he gestured dismissively at the piano, "has been designated for a new, revenue-generating coffee kiosk. It will be much more beneficial to our bottom line." The word hobby hung in the air, a casual dismissal of 40 years of service. An elderly man in a wheelchair who had been tapping his foot to the music frowned. A young woman clutching a teddy bear looked up, her expression crestfallen. Eleanor's hands rested on the keys, suddenly still.
I don't understand. The piano.
"The piano will be removed by the end of the week," Harrison stated flatly, as if discussing office furniture. "We appreciate your years of volunteer service, of course, but all things must come to an end. Today will need to be your last day." He didn't wait for a response. He simply nodded once, turned, and walked away, his polished shoes clicking loudly in the now silent lobby. Eleanor sat frozen on the piano bench. 40 years, 2,000 Tuesdays and Thursdays, countless lives touched by her music, and it was all ending. Not with a thank you, not with a ceremony, but with a cold corporate decree. She looked down at her hands, then at the silent keys. The medicine of the soul had just been declared obsolete. And in the corner of the lobby, a quiet, unassuming man in a worn baseball cap who had been listening from a distance slowly lowered his newspaper. His gaze was fixed on the heartbroken woman at the piano, and his expression was unreadable. Silence descended where music had once lived. For a long moment, Eleanor Vance didn't move. Mr. Harrison's words echoed in the sudden emptiness. Charming hobby. Last day. End of the week. Each phrase was a small, sharp stone pelting the stained glass window of her 40-year legacy. The small crowd of onlookers, the man in the wheelchair, the young mother, a janitor who had paused his sweeping, stood frozen, a collective sense of helpless indignation on their faces. They knew an injustice had occurred, but they were powerless against the man in the sharp suit with the title and the tablet. Slowly, Eleanor gathered herself. With a quiet dignity that defied the humiliation she felt, she began to pack her worn leather satchel. She carefully placed her sheet music inside, the pages soft and frayed at the edges from decades of use. A nurse named Maria, who had worked at St. Jude's for 15 years, rushed over, her face etched with anger. "Eleanor, this is wrong," she whispered, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll talk to someone. We'll start a petition." Eleanor gave her a watery, weary smile. "It's all right, dear. He's the director. He's made his decision." She zipped the satchel, the sound unnaturally loud. It felt so final. She stood, her back aching more than usual, and prepared to walk away from the piano for the last time. She wouldn't look at it. It was too painful. "Excuse me, ma'am?" The voice was quiet, but it cut through the lobby's noise with a gravelly authority. Eleanor turned. It was the man in the baseball cap. He had risen from his seat and was now standing a few feet away. He was tall, but he held himself in a way that didn't draw attention. His face was lined with the kind of deep-set wrinkles that time carves with purpose, but his eyes, clear and direct, held a profound stillness. "Couldn't help it over here," he said, his voice low and raspy. "It seems a shame to let the music stop on such a sour note." Eleanor clutched her satchel. I've been asked to leave. It's my last day." The man nodded slowly, his gaze flicking for a moment toward the director's office before returning to her. "I understand. But before you go, would you mind playing one more song?" She was taken aback. "Oh, I couldn't. They're going to remove the piano. I shouldn't. Just one," he persisted gently, taking a step closer. He looked at the piano, then back at her. "Play as time goes by. I used to hear you play that one on Thursdays. It was my wife's favorite." The specificity of his request stopped her. She gave a small, trembling nod. "All right," she whispered, "just one more." Eleanor sat back down on the piano bench, her hands finding the keys as if by instinct. The onlookers, who had started to disperse, stopped. They turned back. The nurse, Maria, stood by, a defiant look on her face. The janitor leaned on his broom, and the man in the baseball cap took a seat in the chair closest to the piano, took off his cap, and listened. As Eleanor's fingers began to move, the familiar melody filled the lobby. But this time, the music was different. It was imbued with 40 years of memory, with the sting of disrespect, and with a quiet, heartbreaking grace. It was the most beautiful and sorrowful rendition she had ever played. As the final melancholic notes of the song faded, Mr. Harrison emerged from his office, his face a mask of irritation. He saw Eleanor still at the piano and started striding across the lobby, his jaw tight with anger. "I thought I made myself clear," he began, his voice sharp. But then he stopped. He froze mid-stride. His eyes weren't on Eleanor. They were on the man sitting beside her, now clearly visible without the baseball cap. Harrison's expression shifted from anger to confusion, then to a dawning, horrified recognition. He swallowed hard, his corporate confidence evaporating in an instant. The man listening so intently to the music was not just another visitor. He was Clint Eastwood. Time seemed to stop in the St. Jude's lobby. For Robert Harrison, the world narrowed to the face of the man sitting next to the piano. A face known across the globe, a symbol of unshakable American grit, Clint Eastwood. Harrison's mind, usually a swift calculator of profits and losses, short-circuited. He mentally replayed the last 10 minutes, his cold dismissal of the old woman, his smug talk of revenue generation, his casual cruelty, and this man had witnessed it all. The potential for a PR catastrophe, for a career-ending disaster washed over him like an icy wave. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a desperate, fawning panic. The authoritative stride became a hesitant shuffle. He smoothed his tie with a trembling hand and forced a smile that was painfully artificial. He had to fix this. Now. But before Harrison could speak, Clint Eastwood turned his full attention to Eleanor, as if no one else in the room existed. The final notes of the song had faded, and he gave her a slow, genuine nod of appreciation. Thank you, Eleanor, he said, his voice quiet but resonant enough to carry. That was perfect, just as I remembered it. Only then did he turn his gaze to the approaching director. Harrison rushed forward, his hand outstretched. Mr. Eastwood, what an incredible surprise. A true honor to have you at St. Jude's. I'm Robert Harrison, the Director of Operations. I'm a huge admirer of your work. Clint looked at the outstretched hand, then slowly up at Harrison's face. He made no move to take it. His eyes were like chips of ice. I know who you are, Mr. Harrison, he said, his gravelly voice cutting through Harrison's sycophantic tone. I heard what you said to this lady. I was just enjoying the music. Seems you're not a fan. The public rebuke was so direct, so unflinching that a collective gasp went through the small crowd. Nurse Maria crossed her arms, a small triumphant smile on her lips. Eleanor looked from Clint to Harrison, her expression a mixture of confusion and shock. Harrison's hand dropped to his side, his face flushed. Oh no, sir, that's a complete misunderstanding, he stammered, his corporate jargon now sounding like a pathetic excuse. We are simply undergoing a strategic realignment of assets. The new coffee kiosk is part of our patient wellness initiative. Wellness? Clint cut him off, his voice laced with disbelief. He finally stood up, and although he was leaner than Harrison, he seemed to tower over him with sheer presence. You want to talk about wellness? He took a step closer, forcing Harrison to instinctively step back. Let me tell you a story, son, Clint said, his voice dropping lower, pulling everyone in. 30 years ago, my mother spent her final weeks on the 4th floor of this very hospital. It was a hard time for our family. She was scared. We were all scared. And the only thing that brought her a moment of peace was the sound of the piano drifting up from this lobby. He turned and gestured toward Eleanor, who had tears welling in her eyes. It was this woman playing this very piano. Her music was the only medicine that worked when nothing else could. It wasn't revenue generating, Mr. Harrison. It was life affirming. So don't you talk to me about wellness. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a random celebrity visit. This was personal, sacred. Harrison stood speechless, his face pale, the full catastrophic weight of his decision crashing down on him. He hadn't just fired a volunteer and ordered the removal of an old piano. He had desecrated a cherished memory for a man who had the power to amplify his mistake to the entire world. And in Clint Eastwood's cold, unforgiving stare, Harrison saw his bright, ambitious future beginning to crumble into dust. In the deafening silence of the St. Jude's lobby, Robert Harrison's carefully constructed world of spreadsheets and bottom lines had been obliterated by a single, powerful memory. His mind scrambled for a response for any combination of words that could undo the damage. All his corporate training, all his negotiation tactics were useless. Mr. Eastwood, I had no idea, he finally stammered, his voice thin and reedy. The fawning tone was gone, replaced by pure, desperate pleading. It was a terrible, terrible oversight. If I had known about your mother, about the personal significance. Please, you have to believe me. I am so deeply sorry. Clint's expression didn't soften. It hardened. You're not sorry you fired her, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You're sorry you did it in front of me. The truth of the statement was so sharp, so accurate, it left Harrison breathless. This isn't about my mother, Clint continued, his voice resonating with quiet fury. She's been gone a long time. This is about her. He pointed a steady finger at Eleanor. 40 years. She has given 40 years of her life to this place, soothing people you'll never know, calming fears in families you'll never meet. And you brushed it all aside as a charming hobby in under 2 minutes. He then turned his attention away from the crumbling director, his gaze sweeping over the small crowd that had now grown larger. Staff members on their break and more visitors had stopped, drawn in by the palpable tension. His eyes found Nurse Maria, "Nurse," he said, his tone softening just enough to be an invitation. "Tell me, does this music matter to the people here?" Empowered by his question, Maria stepped forward, her chin held high. She looked not at Clint but directly at Mr. Harrison, her voice clear and strong. "Mr. Eastwood, it matters more than he could ever possibly understand. Eleanor isn't just a volunteer, she's our anchor. When we have a devastating day on the ICU, when we lose a patient we fought for, we come down here. We listen for 5 minutes and it helps us go back up and do it all again. She is the soul of this hospital." The elderly man in the wheelchair wheeled himself forward slightly. "She's the only one who makes this place feel less like a sterile building and more like a home," he added, his voice thick with emotion. Clint absorbed their words, nodding slowly. He turned back to Harrison, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. "Well, Mr. Harrison," Clint said, the quiet authority back in his voice, "it seems your modernization project is in need of a significant revision." His tone was no longer conversational. It was a command. "Here's the new plan. The piano stays. Eleanor plays here whenever she wants, for as long as she wants. She will have a permanent, lifetime contract as this hospital's resident artist. Is that clear?" Harrison could only manage a jerky, terrified nod. "Good," Clint said. "And that coffee kiosk you're so excited about? We'll still build it, but we're going to put it over there." He pointed to an empty, less conspicuous corner of the lobby. "And 100% of the profits from that kiosk for its first 5 years will go directly into a new endowment." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle before delivering the final crushing blow. "We'll call it the Eleanor Vance Music and Arts Fund, dedicated to bringing more healing art into every corner of this hospital. I'll be making the first donation myself, a rather substantial one." He looked Harrison dead in the eye, his gaze like steel. "And to ensure that fund is managed properly, I've just spoken to the chairman. I will be accepting the vacant seat on this hospital's board of directors, effective immediately. Our first meeting is tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I expect you'll have a full, detailed proposal for the Eleanor Vance Fund ready for my review. Don't be late." Robert Harrison stood as if turned to stone. The words, "Board of Directors, tomorrow morning, don't be late," were not just a command, they were a verdict. His career at St. Jude's, once a fast track to the top, was now on a tightrope, and the man holding the other end was Clint Eastwood. There was no escape. No corporate doublespeak could save him. He had been so focused on the cost of an old piano that he never considered the price of disrespect. A soft, hesitant applause started from the crowd. It wasn't loud or rowdy. It was a ripple of pure, heartfelt relief that grew into a warm, sustained ovation. It was for Eleanor. It was for the music. It was for the quiet justice they had just witnessed. Nurse Maria hugged Eleanor tightly, whispering, "He told him, Eleanor. He told him." The elderly man in the wheelchair beamed, clapping his hands together with surprising force. Clint Eastwood turned his back on Harrison, dismissing him completely. The director was no longer part of the story that mattered. He walked back to the piano bench where Eleanor sat, looking utterly overwhelmed, her hands trembling in her lap. In a gesture of profound respect that stunned the onlookers, he slowly knelt down on one knee beside her, bringing himself to her eye level. He spoke to her in his low, gravelly voice, a voice that was now gentle. "Eleanor," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I am truly sorry you had to endure that. A person's worth should never have to be proven." He paused, a flicker of old memory in his eyes. "My mother, she always said your music sounded like a letter from a dear friend she hadn't seen in years. So thank you. Thank you for all the letters you wrote her." Eleanor finally found her voice, a soft, tearful whisper. I never knew who was listening. I just hoped it was helping someone." Her focus wasn't on the victory, but on the simple, beautiful revelation that her music had found its home in a stranger's heart all those years ago. Clint smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his rugged face. "It did, Eleanor. It did more than you'll ever know." He stood up, then looked at her, his eyes twinkling. "Now, would you do me the honor of playing again?" "Not as a volunteer whose time is up," he said, casting one last pointed glance over his shoulder at the disgraced director, "but as this hospital's official resident artist." With tears of gratitude now streaming freely, Eleanor nodded. She turned back to the piano, her posture straighter, her shoulders no longer slumped with the weight of dismissal. She placed her fingers on the keys, took a deep, steadying breath, and began to play. This time, the music that filled the lobby was not melancholic. It was a melody of rebirth. It was full of hope, soaring with a quiet, triumphant joy that seemed to wash away the sterile corporate coldness that Harrison had brought with him. It was the sound of a soul being seen, of value being honored. As the beautiful music swelled, the camera pans to Mr. Harrison. He stood for a moment longer, a ghost in the lobby he thought he commanded, before turning and walking away. His shoulders were slumped in defeat, his sharp suit now looking like a costume he was no longer worthy of wearing. He had a long night ahead of him and a new, unshakable reality to face in the morning. The events of that Tuesday morning sent a ripple effect through the halls of St. Jude's Medical Center, proving that sometimes the most profound changes begin not in a boardroom, but with a single act of courage. The months that followed were a testament to that truth. The Eleanor Vance Music and Arts Fund, bankrolled by Clint Eastwood's generous donation and fueled by the profits from the New Corner Coffee kiosk, flourished. It brought in string quartets to play in the oncology ward, art therapists for the pediatric unit, and a small library of books and music for families spending long nights by a loved one's bedside. The hospital, once a place of sterile white walls, began to breathe with color, sound, and a renewed sense of humanity. The old upright piano was beautifully restored, its wood polished to a warm glow. Beside it, a new brass plaque was installed. It didn't just have Eleanor's name, it read, "The heart of this hospital beats in its music. In loving memory of Elizabeth Eastwood and in eternal gratitude to our resident artist, Eleanor Vance, whose music is the medicine of the soul." As for Robert Harrison, he was not fired. In a move that surprised everyone, Clint Eastwood insisted he remain as director, but with one new mandatory responsibility: overseeing the Arts Fund. At first, Harrison did it out of fear, but week after week, as he was forced to witness a child smile during a painting session or listen to a veteran weep silently at the sound of a familiar melody, something inside him began to shift. He started to see people not as data points on a chart, but as human beings in need of comfort. The hard shell of his ambition began to crack, making way for a humility he never knew he possessed. 1 year later, Eleanor Vance sat at her piano playing a cheerful melody. She looked younger, her smile radiant. A young girl, a patient from the 4th floor, presented her with a crayon drawing of a woman playing a piano with a halo of musical notes. Eleanor accepted it with a grateful heart, placing it on the piano next to a growing collection of similar tributes. As she played, a familiar figure quietly took the seat beside her. It was Clint Eastwood, dressed in a simple jacket looking like any other visitor. He didn't speak. He just sat and listened, a quiet contentment on his face. When she finished the piece, he looked over at her. "Still writing beautiful letters, Eleanor," he said softly. She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Every day," she replied. "For your mother, and for anyone else who needs one." He nodded, placing a hand gently on her shoulder for a moment before standing to leave. No more words were needed. And so, the story of Eleanor Vance and the hospital piano comes to a close. It serves as a powerful reminder that the true value of a person or an act of kindness cannot be measured on a balance sheet. For 40 years, Eleanor's quiet dedication was a force of healing, a silent testament to the power of the human spirit. It took one man standing up against casual cruelty to make the world see what had been there all along. This story teaches us that the most important things in life, compassion, art, respect, dignity, are often the quietest. They don't demand attention, but they form the foundation of our humanity. In a world that gets louder and faster every day, perhaps the most important thing we can do is learn to listen for the music. If this story moved you in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know about a time when music or art brought you comfort. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so we can continue to protect and share these beautiful moments in a fast-paced world. We'll see you again on the next journey.